It's really great to see you guys and see all the conversations taking place and see all the connections and networks being made, which is wonderful. It's actually how I wanted to start this panel. So as you can see, we are doing an international scan of community energy models. And the reason we're doing this is essentially because of CECC and because of Martin. And a lot of the incredible work you saw from his presentation first thing this morning, that there has been an evolution of a few years of different grants and networks and connections, starting with Martin and Marc-Andre and that connection grant that formed the CECC. Well, in the last year, they also spearheaded with Dennis and Roger and a number of other members, putting together an application to Natural Resources Canada for a regulatory grid innovation grant that looked at how new actors can actually contribute to grid innovation in Canada. So what we're presenting today is the draft kind of findings of phase one of that three-phase project. So my bit right here is just introducing the project a little bit to you guys to let you know what to do. But really what we're hoping for is each of the panelists here, and some of the members of our advisory team are online and in the room. We're hoping to get your feedback and insight into which of the policies and projects that we're kind of surfacing here sound exciting or interesting or may work in your jurisdictions. Because from this, well, I'll talk about this in a minute, but we're going to be doing a draft report that's going to roll out into a whole huge set of other projects over the next kind of 2 years, I want to say, right? Yeah, so CECC is leading this research project in combination with academics and folks from around the country. So essentially, we'd really like you to kind of in between each of the presentations, we're going to leave space for 1 to 2 burning questions if you have some, and you can stand up and wiggle or whatnot because we have PowerPoint slides and we do not want to subject you to death by PowerPoint. So we'll take these little breaks in between. But I will warn you, there is actually quite a bit of content because we are covering 6 countries. So the broader project itself, as I said, is around regulatory innovation for cooperative ownership and governance in Canadian energy grids. So the project focuses on evaluation of enabling policies. So it is this dance between projects and policies. So it's the both and, not that either or. Right? This isn't just about how are communities navigating their way through policies, but what policy changes do we need to make? And this has been a theme since Anna's talk last night, right? We heard about really interesting ways that communities were navigating, but then also some really kind of key policy changes. So this panel focuses on phase one, and phase one of that broader project was looking at what internationally is interesting and exciting. What's happening in other jurisdictions that are somewhat comparable in some ways to Canada in terms of specific projects, and not just projects that we would call community, but projects that have significant impacts in those communities, political, environmental, economic, and other impacts. So what are the business models? What are the policy frameworks? The team for phase one at the top level there is us up on the stage here. So for those who don't know me, my name is Julie MacArthur. I work here at Royal Roads University in what is now the Faculty of Interdisciplinary Studies. I'm a Canada Research Chair in Reimagining Capitalism, so I loved some of the questions at our panel earlier. I'm also a resident fellow at the Cascade Institute, where my colleague Leighton, who you'll hear from on the next panel, works. Yay, Leighton. The Cascade Institute focuses on analyzing the polycrisis, so the conjuncture of political, economic, and climate crises, and the challenges that we need to kind of scale up and overcome, scale up and roll out solutions to. Our advisory team on this phase one of the NRCan project is, you'll see some familiar faces here. So Daria Tarhan, Chad Walker, Carl Janelle, Karen Miner, and Gladys. Gladys, there she is there, who is keeping us all sane and moving along on the project and doing an excellent job of that. So the research questions we were asking here are, what are the most transformative community-owned projects? And here we aren't looking at, Anna was talking last night about thinking about community ownership in a broader sense. Here we were really focused on projects that had the community not as like a beneficiary of benefits from a corporate developer, but really the community owner and community driver. But what we were attentive to in this project is those partnerships that we keep hearing about, right? How are community energy projects being leveraged in partnership with municipalities or in partnership with other community actors or maybe other actors in general. What are the characteristics of those projects in terms of the energy activities? So what our panel is going to maybe add that we haven't heard a lot about is other kinds of energy services. So microgrid development, geothermal developments, things outside of solar and wind generation. So thinking about community energy innovation is something that's more than power generation. And in some of the cases you'll hear about, this was due to policy changes that made it so tough to build a project, a generation project. And so you'll see this kind of innovative mobility of some of the projects developing other things from microgrids to battery and whatnot. And then that other element is what are the policies and policy designs in these jurisdictions that facilitate it. So we're looking at 6 different countries, right? And we didn't do like a systematic review of every single country because we've only been at this for a few months. But what we tried to pull was illustrative cases of really significant projects and the interesting kinds of policies that supported them. So we looked at Denmark and Germany, Australia, New Zealand, the US, and the UK. So Niels here is going to start us off with looking at the Danish and the German cases. And then Kaola's going to look at Australia and New Zealand. And then Dana's going to take us through the US and the UK. And those cases were selected because the Danish and German cases, as many of you well know, are really leading in the policy side, and they're part of the broader European energy policies that really enable some really innovative stuff to take place there. The Australian and New Zealand cases have similarities that we wanted to draw from for those of the folks in the room around Indigenous ownership and the role of innovation in federal systems, for example, which the Australian system you heard last night has some interesting similarities here in Canada. And the UK and the US are part of the Anglosphere countries as well, but also has some really kind of interesting lessons that really shocked me when we started looking at things like the number of municipal utilities and other sort of ancillary community energy actors that could be potential partners. So the last thing I really want to talk about is this is too small for everyone to see, but our kind of framework comes from the academic literature on community energy transformation. And here we're not just looking at economic returns through community and economic development. We're really understood. We have this table with all these different things. And I asked these folks in every one of the cases they were looking at to try to find examples of, is there political mobilization coming out of this project? Is there energy learning that's coming out of this project? Are these low carbon projects or are these greenwashing projects, right? Like there are a wide range, and we heard this in Anna's presentation last night too, of potential benefits that can arise from community energy projects, but we don't always measure them. We often focus on the economic, which matters hugely, but to make the case for policy support, we need to go so much further beyond that to the kind of social trust development, the community kind of cohesion development, the political mobilization and other things. So this, as I said, is phase 1. We're giving you a presentation and we're hoping to get your feedback at the forum today. We're going to draft the country reports and those will be open to those members on the project. And then we're going to pull those together into a final report that we'll make public. So please do contact me if you have feedback that doesn't make it into our presentation and panel here. And then phase 2 is going to be done by Dunsky and Associates, and they're going to look at Canadian regulatory barriers and assessment of those. So how do we translate some of these learnings across the different provinces and their really unique regulatory contexts? And then phase 3, we're going to have provincial regional workshops to roll out roadmaps of how we get to these changes. So it's a big, very ambitious project. So I will stop there. Niels, you are up. So he's going to take us through Germany and Denmark on our tiki tour of international cases.
Yeah, thank you, Julie, for this introduction, and thank you all. It's been mind-blowing, interesting to hear all these conversations and also being part of that project. I really want to thank you for including me in this. I'm getting also a little bit choked up here because I think I didn't actually realize until also this session how energetic and how powerful this whole idea is, but also the CCC, what you do, and so on. So I'm very thankful to be able to contribute with the scan here. And I am from Denmark, as you said. I've been in North America now for 8 years. I worked at the Danish embassy for 5 years before, so I went into the political diplomatic world, and then I came to City of North Vancouver, so was in a municipal setting there, and now I have my own consultancy company, which is rewarding because I can now work on a project like this. So we have a very tight schedule here. There's obviously a lot to speak about on each of the countries, so I'll make sure I don't take all your time with too much other stuff. But before going into Germany and Denmark, I think it's relevant to also look a little bit about on EU. Again, this is going to be high level. There's so much to speak about on each of these jurisdictions. So, but at least it will give you an idea. Here are some of the policy enablers for specific community energy, and some of them you maybe already know. The really big ones, Renewable Energy Directive 1 and 2, which came out 2009, and then the number 2 came in 2018, was really kind of where, especially on the RED2, rights to generate, consume, store, and sell renewable energy. So that was a big one for community energy. Also, the non-discriminatory access to energy markets and support schemes is kind of included in that. But it came, so to Julie's point, Denmark and Germany and some of the Scandinavian countries has actually been doing a lot of this very early on, and I'll go into that on the country cases. So it's more actually reflecting what has already been done in a lot of the member countries. So it's a little bit interesting to see how sometimes it comes top down, sometimes it comes bottom up in Europe, especially on the community energy. It's mostly so in Denmark it's from top down, but from EU it's bottom up basically. So it's a little bit interesting how that plays out. Internal Electricity Market Directive in 2019 introduced the concept of city energy communities. And then Clean Energy or European Package in 2009, a comprehensive legislative package, EU Power 2022. And then there is also some EU funding support, as I've listed here, especially the Horizon 2020 has made a lot of impact on a lot of these projects to actually make them happen. I will start with Germany, so I'm not colored to my background. So just a very high level flying. I know there's some Germans here in the room, so I hope it will probably be fact checked. But so yeah, this is just I think the main thing for Germany is that they are the country in the world with the most community energy systems, actually. So they have been a main driver, and as you can see here, it started already back in the 1800s. So back in the 1867, a German cooperative law that formally recognized cooperatives as a legal business structure. So it started early on there. In 1973, the oil crisis, as in everyone else, was a huge kicker for some changes as well, because I think, especially also for Denmark, it was a huge wake-up call how dependent we were on the fossil fuels and so on. So also for Denmark, that has been a main driver away from fossil fuel and starting that transition already back in the 70s. And then in 2000, introduction to the Renewable Energy Source Act was also a big driver for community energy systems in Germany. So one of the cases we have selected is Junde, and I don't know if any of the Germans here know Junde. It's a small city, 800. It's between Hanover and Frankfurt. But a little bit, again, what has been some of the enablers and drivers for that? Again, the Renewable Energy Source Act has been crucial for this. There was biomass incentives, onshore solar, offshore wind. So it was not only solar, it also included a lot of bioenergy and biomass energy production. And then the market stimulation program has been a big supporter and enabler. So one of the cases here is the bioenergy village, Junde. So it's a small community. 800 is living there, residents. So 70% of the community came to own 100% of the energy system. So it was part of bigger, what would you call it, reward program. So there was a university there, ICNE, that kind of built the concept of bioenergy villages, like more generally. And when that kind of concept was built, 54 communities kind of was interested to go and do an actual project to become, basically it was about getting independent on the fossil fuel and kind of secure their own energy supply. And then it was nailed down to 17, which was qualified and had enough engagement. And then it ended up to be Yunde. And I don't think anyone really have heard about Yunde before, but when you really dig into it, it's quite amazing what they did. So they won this concept, and that's kind of kicked off the project. They got a lot of funding also from local and national, but there was also a membership fee. So 70% again of the community signed up and paid this 1,500 euros. So the project background started in 2001 to 2024, and it's basically it's a biogas plant, combined heat and power. They also have a wood chip boiler for district heating. So, and they have a fully district heating network as well. So it's all based on bioenergy, basically, and all from manure and other waste products from farming in the area. So that's why they actually became the first self-sufficient energy village in Germany back then. And just moving to the next slide here, there's a little bit of like an overview of the system, but and they were depending also, of course, of a lot of funding. They got approximately 3 million total support. And they also were benefiting of the feed-in tariffs, especially for biomass. And they were also benefiting on some special feeding tariffs from innovative solutions and also the specific use of biomass. So that kind of made the project happen there. And then again, the community, the resident like the share of 1,500 per residence obviously helped as well. So, and it became such a success in Germany that since then 16 similar systems has actually been developed based on this program. So it actually did make a big impact. Some of the learnings, which I've already alluded to, the project enabled 16 other projects in Germany, and of course also the whole educational part of engaging for this project was a big, kind of created some self-confidence, and then there was a big part of it was also some job creation and keeping some labor in, educating labor for this project. So that is just making sure here I'm not running out of time. That's a little bit about the German. Then there's going into the Danish case. A little bit of fly-in about Denmark. We are a small country, so it does help a lot when you are a small country like that to make things happen and also to make legislations. So the community ownership is interesting because when I hear a lot of the conversations here, I didn't realize actually how fundamental all this community engagement has been for Denmark's development, but also for a lot of the renewable energy transition. Like even in my childhood, we had a freezer cooperative. So there was a collaborative, like a community-owned freezer cooperative that you could rent freezing space. We have local stores as well that is cooperatives, and so it's always been part of the Danish society. So that's probably also why it has been developing so much. And for the district heating sector as well, it's 70% of all the district heating system is community owned or collaborative owned. So I didn't think about really how much it has advanced our society, that this has been so fundamental, but it's quite significant. So this is a list of a lot of legislations has been put in place earlier on, and then some of it has been adapted by EU. But I would say one of the key things is the Danish Energy Agency. So that is a regulatory body that basically is a one-shop arm of the government to approve and to regulate a lot of the energy systems, and including collaboratives. So that was put in place in 1970. It's still existing and is still a key player. So, and that's on a national level. So any projects that come in from municipalities has to be approved and also go through the Danish Energy Agency. And one thing that you don't hear here about is that the social economy aspect of projects is a fundamental pillar for approval. So that very much goes into circular economy. How does it benefit the local community, energy efficiency, and also very much on the green transition. So the social economic aspect here, we never hear that so much, but it's actually fundamental for getting a project approved. So it's something you can think about as part of some of the things to advocate for. Feed-in tariffs was fundamental and was put in place in 2000 to 2020. Now it's been transitioned more into a market-driven model. And the net metering, as we have been talking about a lot here as well, came into effect in 2010 to 2020. Allowing a community to offset energy costs by feeding surplus solar power into the grid. And then later on in 2020, 2024, the support for energy communities handbook was also published. And one thing I want to emphasize here as well, and especially because of when I worked at the embassy, I think there could be an opportunity to try to tie the work that you do together with a lot of the experiences and what can kind of make up a peer or communication with both Denmark and Germany, that you can learn a lot. It's never really plug and play, but there is so much I feel that could be helpful here to try to just make direct connections or communication, and I'm happy to do that as well. So the case I want to bring up, Samsø Renewable Energy Island. I know you talked about that. It's been presented many times, so I'm glad to hear. It's a really cool project. So Samsø, Samsø is here, small island between Zealand and Jutland. So they won a competition also by the Danish government for demonstrate that integrated energy planning can be implemented within a limited geographical area. So they won that competition, and the foundational for the project was that the first funding they got was enough to hire a full-time staff to drive that whole transition to 100% renewable energy in 10 years. So that was the funding was then applied to hire that person that then kind of was moving a lot of this forward. So they have 4 district heating plants, which is mostly fired by straw. So this is also another resource that is not, or at least underestimated, like straw from farming, can be used as a huge resource. Solar plants as well, wind, both offshore and onshore wind, which all feeds into the community and then access in electricity production is exported to Jutland. And they also formed kind of their own Samsø energy company, which was like a corporation that then made sure that all the projects was approved and they met the criteria, and kind of was the main driver for the whole transition. And then so obviously it couldn't happen without a lot of funding. The municipality of the island also chipped in with a lot of funding for especially the offshore wind turbines. But The district energy plant was community owned. Some of the wind turbines was also owned, and then there was a contribution for each of the residents. And they also got some funding from the electricity, the surplus electricity that they exported to the rest of Denmark. They got some of the taxes actually back that they could also fund this project. So a lot of different mechanisms here was put in place for this project. So the total financing came into 53.3 million euro, and 23 of those was subsidies and grants for that project. So a little bit back to some of the learnings. Like it is possible to transition away and make like a local community independent, and but for Denmark, especially here, it has been crucial. And now it doesn't work anyway. It has been crucial that the municipality got engaged as well, and that has always been part of the backbone of the Danish systems, that the municipalities has always been more or less engaged, and also the grid access has been fairly easy. And also one of the key learnings here, master planning, of course, has been crucial and to kind of follow, but also be able to navigate and change and adjust as needed. And then I think a big part of it was job creation here as well, but the whole promotional part of it. So the island now gets 4,000 visitors every year just to listen and to hear about the story, which has created a massive income as well. So there's really, it has brought a lot of international attention as well, which is part of the academy that they have also created based on this project. And then they have made all of their learnings and how they got to where they are now available, and is publicly available. So that's part of also where they give back a lot of what they gained here.
So I think for both examples, there was definitely a big amount of grant funding. Is that, I guess the question is that essential? Is there possibilities for things like this to take off without that kind of grant impetus at the beginning?
So yeah, both of the projects started in the early 2000s. So I would say back then, yeah, it was crucial and fundamental. But it has moved more into more market-based. So some of the newer projects, especially for Denmark on district heating, is actually not depending on any funding anymore. So I guess to get it off the ground, yeah, it's been very important. But actually at this point in newer time, it's not actually so much the case anymore. So it partly answers your questions, but it has moved away from needing a lot of grant based on the experiences.
It's a great question, though, because that's part of our report. You know, we're trying to get this feedback for the report, and one of the things we're thinking about is pre-policy changes that were supportive and post, right? And you'll hear that in some of the other cases. But great point. Thank you, Dennis.
How actual examples where it's been done without 50% grant funding?
Yeah, there is actually. We can definitely we can look that up for sure.
There
is
one each country, but we have this like long list of different examples showing different things.
So I can stand up as well. Thanks a lot, Nils. I appreciate very much your presentation. Thanks a lot, and especially for the comment that you mentioned that a lot of these European communities were actually supported by Horizon 2020, now Horizon Europe. And yeah, so that's actually my part here. That's why I'm invited also by Martin to come over to speak about Horizon Europe. And maybe I will limit my comment only to the fact that Canada is now associated to Horizon Europe like any other member state or associated country. So practically since the morning, I have a question: why we are not using more Horizon Europe grants for supporting your communities, right? And maybe a good question to your analysis may be, how many of them actually were supported by Horizon Europe, and for which particular part. I guess a lot of them will be linked to the integration of novel technologies and demonstration that they are viable, economically functioning, and so on. Yeah, that may be a little hint there. Thank you very much.
I think maybe we should transition to the next presentation. Thank you so much, Niels.
Thank you. Good.
Hi, I'm Kella, and I have the daunting task of covering Australia and New Zealand, which we have two experts here that know much more than I do. So I told them to cover their ears. I do something a little bit differently than Niels, is that I look more of like the bottom up policy implications for these two examples that I'm going to cover today, and also how like cross-industry collaboration works with community energy. So the first case study is the Marlinja community microgrid, which Anna talked about yesterday briefly, and it's the first First Nations owned microgrid and in the world, I think, and it launched just this past year in 2024. But what's really interesting about this microgrid is the context of the community itself. So Marlinja is a very small community, about 700 kilometers away from Darwin, and it only has really like 60 people that live there, 16 households in total. And with that being said, like Anna kind of prefaced yesterday, is that in these remote kind of areas, they depend on diesel and gas. And so Marlinja depends on diesel from a very, very shoddy, fragile feeder line that comes from Elliott, which is about 25 kilometers away, and it's also a small town. And so with that being said, and it's not connected to the national electricity market in Australia, which typically covers the south of Australia and I think the east. And so with that being said, they constantly face blackouts. I think it said the statistics was like there's 41 automatic disconnections per year due to the prepaid meter turning off. And the prepaid meter itself, according to the First Nations Renewable Energy Network, is they call it a poverty premium, because Indigenous communities are, there's 40% poverty rates in remote Indigenous communities, and they have to pay in advance to get electricity. And so if you don't pay in advance, then you're automatically cut off. And so and this goes back to what Anna talked about. I'm just going to keep referencing you. Bracket Anna 2025. This goes back to the colonial inequalities that continue to exist in settler colonial Australia. So the traditional owners sought an alternative. And so in 2019, they approached Original Power, which is also an Indigenous-led nonprofit, to co-develop this renewable energy solution. And the project was built in two phases. So the first phase was very, very small solar battery on top of a community center. And that was just to kind of give refuge to the community during outages, which frequently happen. And so upon that success, they decided to go with phase two. And phase two was the implementation of the 100 kilowatt ground-mounted solar PV array, and we'll talk about why it's ground-mounted and not rooftop, and a 36 kilowatt battery bank with a hybrid inverter, which is very cool, in my opinion. And of course, in line with this forum, it's 100% community-owned and locally governed. And what's really interesting is that no household was asked to contribute cash, but rather this idea of sweat equity which I'm like going like this because it's kind of cringe. It just sounds like, like sweatshop labor, but it's not. I promise you. So basically, that was the key buy-in for this project for the residents. And what sweat equity means is that residents help build the system, and they get training on solar and electrical skills, and they also and then this helps with like contractor costs, but also it gives them kind of this agency and power and responsibility over the ownership of and the co-authorship of the system. So let's get into the nice stuff. So the project funding came from 3 levels. So Marlinda received the seed funding from the Berkeley Regional Grant deal, which is actually not a renewable energy deal. It's mainly for Indigenous communities to help build their infrastructure. And they received $100 million for a 10-year project. And it's a regional deal in terms of it's between the national government, the Commonwealth, and the Northern Territory, as well as Berkeley Regional Council. And so what they decided to do with that is build this renewable energy microgrid. And something interesting to know, which is kind of what I spoke to when I first started, is that because of them focusing on a renewable energy project, it led to a policy change where at the national level, where this microgrid was featured as one of the prominent examples of the First Nations clean energy strategy that the government is now implementing. At the territorial level, which is the Northern Territory, the role was both financial through the deal, but also instrumentally through the government-owned utilities. And so here, just Canada Energy, the Northern Territory electricity retailer, partnered with Original Power for a benefit-sharing trial to credit solar-saving households. So this was the first time in the Northern Territories where we see the output of mid-scale solar farm translated into a prepaid meter, and that credits all the participating households. And so in practice, what happens is Jacina applies a fixed daily rate to the household's prepaid meter that mimics the bill savings of a customer that would have a rooftop solar panel, for instance. And this led to 70% savings on their electricity bill. Another thing that happened at the territorial level was that the Power and Water Corporation, which owns and operates electricity networks in the region, allowed the microgrid to connect on a zero export behind the meter basis. And so there was no PPA needed. And what that basically means, like from the presentations that we just heard from, is that while they had to like cap the amount of solar panels that they can put on a rooftop, for instance, this one would just go, since it's a zero export, it would just go into the battery and then be stored and then used up at a later time. So, and I'll kind of talk about that later. And then at the community level, so there was $350,000 remaining. And so what they did was basically raise it through in-kind donations. And technology providers were able to donate and discount major components. And then also the local council offered a lot of like logistical and technical help. Oh yeah, so I forgot that this is also another slide. In terms of the grid access, so this is where that battery system comes into play and why it's a microgrid. The system is connected to the grid, but it's islandable. So what does that mean? It can be disconnected and run independently. It doesn't need the grid itself, the regional grid. So during outages, it ensures no interruptions. So that amount of times that they have to deal with the 40 outages a year are now down to 0. And it's behind the meter, as I said. Design means it doesn't sell power, but offsets it to households, cutting diesel reliance and saving generator fuel. So what can we take away from this project? That community consent isn't a barrier, it's a foundation. Sweat equity, that sounds like, a catchphrase. Thank you. Sweat equity and partnership can substitute financial capital. So that's through that. They need to change that word though. And then policy change can follow successful pilots. And then, yeah, I kind of talked about all these things already. Next one. The Rucramara solar farm is the first one that's first solar owned farm in New Zealand. It was launched in 2020. And it's a 107 kilowatt array at the town's wastewater treatment plant and a 23 kilowatt array at the Okea College. And some background to this case study is that Otaki is a small town with only a population of 3,500. And it's placed deep within the Maori roots, with over 41% of the residents being identifying as Indigenous. At the heart of this renewable energy project is a greater initiative, a charitable trust called Energize Otaki, which I know you both know a lot about, so I won't talk much about it. Which was it was founded in 2011, and basically their motto is enough good energy for everyone, and so they really emphasize this equitable and community-centered approach to renewable energy, and have had like different really cool projects like a repair cafe, a food waste to biogas project, a bike space. Anyway, it's very cool stuff that they do. Okay, so with this solar farm, it's very much rooted in Indigenous holistic approaches, and it was launched in 2020, like I said. How they were able to get it kind of off the ground was they used existing policies and laws to aid in the development of the project. So for instance, there's this law about access connection rights through the electricity provider, Electra. They were able to do so by utilizing the Electricity Industry Act of 2010. Also, the Resource Management Act of 1991 mandates that renewable energy benefits be considered. And then lastly, the National Policy Statement on Renewable Electricity Generation in 2011 meant that local authorities were obligated to weigh the national interest in clean energy projects. So the land development is really cool because it's like a peppercorn land lease, which means like they just pay $1 a year for the land itself. And since the land was already developed, they didn't really need to go through many regulatory hurdles. The majority of the funding came from the Regional Wellington Community Trust, which is an independent trust that serves the Greater Wellington region. And they also use the behind-the-meter system, but unlike Marlinja, the energy isn't used on-site at retail value. It's exported into the grid if whatever is left over. And they use like 2 smart meter trackers to kind of ensure that to calculate the usage and export dynamics of the project. Now, this is something that's really interesting, or I found interesting at least, is that Infotrek, which is a private engineering company and subsidiary of the local lines company Electra, took an open book policy in developing the solar farm. So that means that they kind of went into a commitment with Energize Otaki to be fully transparent over cost, profit margins, and procurement, which was rare for private entities to do. In terms of community support, the project's financial model itself serves the community. So rather than seeking high commercial return, the solar farm was designed to cover the costs and then channel whatever remaining surplus into the revenues of Energize Otaki Fund and into other community initiatives. So this is what stands out for this project, is that it's the first model community solar farm in New Zealand, and it centers transparency among private and public actors, Indigenous values, and reinvestment in local well-being. And also the I already said all this stuff, so I'm not going to say it again. That's it. We're done. If you have questions about, my Venn diagram.
I don't have any elaborate, interesting question, but so for the last example, some of the solar panels are on top of a wastewater treatment plant. If there's a power outage, would those solar panels help keep the wastewater treatment plant going? This is an interesting idea, which I think maybe is a way for us to market community energy. Municipal infrastructure is pretty essential for life. And water filtration, wastewater treatment. If we could convince cities to let community energy groups come in and put in solar power and wind power and other independent power sources, that could really improve our resilience when climate change, extreme weather events, and other things hurt us. So back to the original question, could it power the wastewater plant?
That's a good question. I think it does, but I have to check. I finished the report for this one. So yeah, okay. So, okay, yay, Otaki experts. I was pretty sure, but I was like, I don't know. I don't want to say yes 100%. I'll check my notes. Yeah.
Can I just add from a technical perspective? I know that in Alberta, if you don't have a battery, if the grid goes out, the solar goes out as well. So it may be how it's set up in a jurisdictional place. So great idea, Dennis, but we might have to do a little more in certain places to facilitate that. Sorry. Continue with questions.
It might be off topic, but I'll try. So with that one, but also with the Australian one, you basically said they're behind the meter, so they don't export any energy, but they're standalone, right? But like kind of not, because they're still connected to that diesel thing?
So they're both, no, they're not standalone. The one in Australia is islandable. So like if the power cuts off from the grid, they're able to self-sufficiently
And
produce
do they have
power.
to flip a switch to do that, or is that
It's, I think,
automatic?
this battery system and the
Yeah.
hybrid inverter
Yeah.
that they use that allows them to kind of,
Okay.
flip the switch basically.
Because I know from like Germany, again, if you want to do like your standalone system, kind of where you can leave the grid, you have to physically move a switch around. They're not allowed to do it automatically. That's why I was interested in, is that actually automatically going off grid then?
I have to check.
Oh, it is?
I would say it's very new. It's 2024. So.
Oh, yeah, but in Germany, you are not allowed to use them, right? So
They export them.
Like, what's the significance of automatic?
because it's something that I find moves a lot of people in the question of renewable energy, especially like in rural settings. They're wanting to know if they're going to be physically standalone off-grid able. And then right now in Alberta, it's kind of like we don't sell the batteries because price-wise doesn't make sense. But the whole concept of kind of being able to say, well, I'm going to be standalone if the grid falls away and I'm still going to have power, that's a big selling point. Also for communities. And it's something that I haven't really seen many examples of how that exactly works when you're grid connected, but you're also able to be off grid. Because if people want to go all off grid, that's a big challenge and that's very costly. But if they're able to sustain off grid for like 36 hours, that's a selling point, if it's feasible.
Hi, everyone. Dan Kerwin from Concordia. So I have the UK and the US. So I did one case study for the UK and then I cheated and I'm quickly going to do 3 case studies for the US just because there were too many to choose from. So in the so in the UK, it's been liberalized since the 1990s. So they used to have one national utility. Now it's been broken up. In the map on the right, you can see kind of the 6 different distribution utilities that are there. One thing that is interesting to note, National Grid, which operates in the southwest of the country, also owns utilities in Massachusetts and in New York. So it's interesting to see kind of how they operate in kind of both different countries. Relatively innovative, but in the US, I actually find them to be more innovative on the residential side. For the UK market, it's regulated by Ofgem, so they set the prices, and then all the distribution system operators need to kind of figure out how they're going to make their specific grids fit those national rules. And then if you're like an individual homeowner or a business, you're typically not going to pay the DSO or the DNO, sorry, you're going to pay like a retail electricity provider. For individuals, businesses, what have you, co-ops, there's a few different ways that they can kind of benefit from DERs. They do, like, you can't just have a solar garden or a solar farm and export the electricity. But then they also have a lot of like demand response programs in place. So we're not looking at just solar projects. It's often like solar plus battery projects that you're able to benefit from. And then on the residential side, there's a nationwide time of use rate. So electricity is more expensive first thing in the morning and later on in the afternoon. So right when everyone wakes up, and then again, when everyone comes home from work, those are like your 2 residential peak periods. But overnight and in the middle of the day, that's when electricity is less expensive. In the UK, so community energy cooperatives have been around since around 2010. It was very grant focused. So in the image on the right from the Nolden article, they do a good job of, he does a good job of outlining kind of the transition from grant-based community energy cooperatives through the feed-in tariff period, which then got killed between 2015 and 2019. And now cooperatives need to figure out, okay, well, now we have no more feed-in tariff. The rate that they get from solar is the same as any solar generator. So how are they going to make all these projects kind of pencil out? So since 2011, there's been a few national and subnational, I guess we could call it, regulations. So there's the Localism Act, which allows municipalities to like designate certain areas within the municipality for renewable energy development. So if there's like a brownfield site, they can say this is going to be a solar garden. If there's going to be a demolition, they can say community projects kind of get first dibs on what's going to happen to that space. In 2014, they came out with a community energy strategy. But then in 2015, they decided to kill the feed-in tariff. So it's like, hey, here's a nice strategy. And then next year, your feed-in tariff and how you guys are making your money is going away. So then that got replaced in 2020 by the Smart Export Guarantee. So it's very similar, but it's not that super high feed-in tariff that they used to have. 2021 and 2022, they came out with their net zero strategy and their energy security strategy. And like they've really placed local ownership within both of those. So even though they've moved away from the feed-in tariff, kind of local ownership is still a big part of the UK market. In the Welsh and Scottish areas, they have specific programs to help community energy developers. That doesn't exist in England. So if you're an English cooperative, you're a little bit on your own. Ofgem also has a regulatory sandbox. So for piloting things like peer-to-peer trading, which they're doing right now, you can do it through this sandbox without needing to jump through like a ton of hoops to actually like do a big regulatory change. So the UK case that I chose is the Bristol Energy Cooperative. I know there was someone here from Bristol last year, so I'm not going to talk too much about the history of the Bristol Cooperative, but it's been around since 2011. They have 2,000 members. To date, 17 rooftop solar installations and 2 ground-mounted solar installations, and then 2 microgrid projects that they have on the go as well, which I'm going to get into on the next slide. They have about 12 megawatts of power, enough for 3,500 homes. Really interesting here is, and they even talk about it on their website specifically, is like what they're going to do after the feed-in tariff. And so a big part for them has been community energy shares. So just in the last few years, they've been able to raise $7 million already. And so post feed-in tariff, as they've been trying to figure out, okay, well, how are we going to stay in business, basically? They partnered with Chelwood Community Energy, which is a community benefit society. So similar to a co-op, but not the same thing. In a co-op, you can pay out your cooperative members. In a benefits society, you can't do that. All the benefits need to go to the community. It's like very broad how they do that. So what they did is those two organizations plus Clean Energy Prospector, which is like a startup microgrid controls company, they formed a new company called Microgrid Foundry. And the goal of the Microgrid Foundry is basically to be able to replicate net zero neighborhoods. So they're going in and they're saying, okay, well, we're going to take, in this case, 33 buildings, and we're going to make them all net zero. And they want to be able to basically copy and paste that model. So there's 33 homes here, 117 kilowatts of rooftop solar, air source heat pumps, hot water heaters, and batteries are all part of this, as well as EV charging. So they can just sell the electricity that they generate from the solar panels, but then also during those peak times with all the batteries that they have, they're able to provide grid services to National Grid. So it's kind of like the second revenue stream that makes the whole project pencil out. And that is how at least these guys have been able to figure out how to kind of stay in business essentially. And whenever they do these new projects, community shares are now a part of it. The most recent community shares that they issued were in 2024. Minimum investment was $100, maximum investment was $100,000. Regardless of how much you put into it, you only get one vote within the co-op. So you become a member, but you still only get one vote. And it was a 6% rate of return that they were projecting, but they did leave themselves like a little bit of a wiggle room for like if there's cost overruns for the project. And so then they have a very kind of broad definition of what benefits are for their local community. Obviously, there's just the actual electricity, like the revenue from the electricity that gets generated and from the services provided. But then they've also set up like local funds that local nonprofits can go and apply for funding through as well. So they take a just energy transition approach to kind of everything they do. They've stood up the Sustainable Energy Partnership. So it's kind of a charity that does R&D and things like that. So there's been 50 different community groups that have accessed funding through their Megawatt Community Energy Fund. For the US, just a few quick learnings. So post-FIT, previously you could just kind of be a renewable energy cooperative and you could just set up your solar array and generate electricity and make from the perspective of the government, obscene profits, quote unquote, was the term that they used. So they moved away from that, and so now how are they going to do that? And it's all sort of through partnerships that they're making this happen. A lot of cooperatives aren't going to have all of the expertise to be able to develop these new types of projects. So partnering with startups, partnering with other organizations, that's super important. In the Bristol piece, they still retain 49% of the Microgrid Foundry, but then they have the Community Benefit Society, which is also part of it. So more than 51% is going to be community owned and controlled still. The other piece is that, they need to move away from just strictly solar projects. If there's no storage, these projects typically, they're not going to pencil out. And then the benefits are really going to be locally dependent. So in Bristol, they have sort of this really broad approach to community benefits. They're really sharing the revenue from those projects around and not just keeping it internally. For the US, like I said, so I cheated and I did 3 quick ones, but it was really hard to choose given just how big and how many people and how many projects there are in the US. So from a regulatory standpoint, FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, they regulate about 60% of electricity in the United States, but only in the areas colored in the top right map. So those are the states which they don't have vertically integrated utilities, and they're trading electricity in wholesale markets amongst each other. The areas that aren't colored, those are vertically integrated utilities, and they don't trade amongst each other. So FERC doesn't have anything to do with them. There's been several different orders that FERC has passed over the years. They all kind of build upon each other. So it sort of started with just like allowing demand response aggregation. So what's that? So let's say like we all have heat pumps or we all have batteries. Being able to aggregate all of those things essentially turns all of us like into a big corporation or a big like a big business. And so instead of just reducing your electricity demand by 2 kilowatts or 4 kilowatts, well, now you're reducing your electricity by 100 kilowatts. So then you can access the commercial and the industrial demand response programs that exist. And so the most recent one that was just passed in 2020, and they all sort of build upon each other. So now this allows heat pumps, heat pump hot water heaters, thermal storage of other kinds like brick heaters or phase change material. It's going to allow solar. Everything now is able to participate in these different markets. There's a few other pieces that are important in legislation. So the Rural Electrification Act, that's what gives you all of the rural electric cooperatives in the United States. And then Clean Air Act, passed by Richard Nixon, gives a lot of like control to individual states to be able to, it gives them money to be able to do different types of projects. The 3 small maps that you see, so on the bottom left one, the blue, that's the investor-owned utilities in the United States. In yellow, that's publicly owned. So that could be state-owned. It could be a municipal-owned project as well. And then the one in green, that's all the cooperatives. And so just to dive into that a little bit. So you have generation and transmission cooperatives, and then you have on the right your distribution and your retail cooperatives. So they really like are all over the place, and there's a lot of like overlap of investor-owned utilities, publicly owned utilities, and cooperative utilities like within the same states. So all these entities are either competing, sometimes working together. So the first case study that I wanted to take a look at was, it's in Puerto Rico. So the hydroelectric cooperative of the mountain. I won't butcher the Spanish for you guys, sorry. So this is Puerto Rico's first rural electric power cooperative. So it came out of Hurricane Maria, which was in 2017. And in this particular area, there were 90,000 people that were without power for 9 months. 60% of those people are below the poverty line. And so like the distribution infrastructure in those areas was not very good, to say the least. And so like they lost power first, and then they were the last ones to also be connected. So there was a lot of like disaster relief funding that was there. The state utility in Puerto Rico went bankrupt. So they had to get rid of all the distribution assets that they had. They still do generation and transmission, but all the distribution end of wires type of stuff is now in the hands of a private company and these guys. So they started off, they have 3 different projects, and I'll dive into each of them. The first one is basically fixing old hydro dams that were being underutilized. The second one is their solar projects. And then they've just recently started to make a microgrid that's going to connect these 5 communities and the 2 other projects all together. So the first one, the Hydro Energy Reborn project, there were several dams in the area that should have had a capacity of 43 megawatts, but that were only operating at 6 megawatts. So after the utility went bankrupt, they've essentially acquired these, I can't remember exactly how many there are, but they've acquired all of these different dams. And in 18 months, they're projecting that they're going to be able to put new turbines, refurb them for about $150 million, and then get them up to hopefully that 50 megawatt capacity that they're supposed to be at. The co-op themselves, they don't have the expertise to kind of do this project. So they've partnered up with kind of a host of kind of experts in this space. Siemens is there, as is Southern Company, which is one of like the largest investor-owned utilities in the United States, with 2.1 gigawatts of electricity kind of in their portfolio. So post Maria, there was like a lot of people like, this was a pretty well advertised like kind of crisis that was happening for these 5 communities. So there's been kind of a lot of help that's that's been coming in. The second piece that they have is this RE-Enfoco project. And so that is the Spanish acronym for their solar project. And so the first phase of it is 5 megawatts, rooftop solar and local businesses and a few other entities. They did a lot of stakeholder engagement to figure out like which communities or which buildings, which homes, apartment buildings were going to get the solar. Because if the power does go out, they are able to just power the buildings themselves. So the first block of those 5 megawatts is $17.5 million, and they're going to just try to kind of continue to do that. And then the last piece, which is like super neat, microgrid of the mountain. So it's to connect the 5 communities and connect the other 2 projects kind of all into one microgrid. So it's the first intermunicipal microgrid in Puerto Rico. And again, they partnered with one of the national labs, the Idaho National Lab, so part of the Department of Energy, and then also a California microgrid developer are part of that. So they're anticipating that they're going to be able to reduce electricity costs for the local residents by 20%, depending on how the hydro refurbishments go, could be as high as 60%. Reduced electricity costs. And so they're actually going to be the electricity provider for the 5 communities, but they're going to be able to island the whole thing. So that's that project. Moving beyond just that one, because I think that project has a lot of importance for Canada in terms of like our rural and remote communities. There's dams that are underused across Ontario, Atlantic Canada. I'm not sure about the BC case, but elsewhere, like there's dams that were old and aren't being used and that could potentially be repurposed. Again, doesn't necessarily need to be hydro either, but I think there's some good lessons here, even though it is a lot of grant funding that funded this whole thing. When you think of the United States, so yes, FERC is the regulator, but then the independent system operators have to then implement those rules. And then the state governments, utilities, and the regulators then need to implement those different rules. So what they end up looking like locally is going to be very different. So this map here is from the Institute of Local Self-Reliance. So they're looking at 18 indicators that kind of defined and ranked community power. So that's going to be munis, that's going to be co-ops, right? It's not just co-ops that they have here. And only Illinois, which I was a little bit surprised of, received a B grade. There's a few C's on the West Coast and the East, but mostly local power isn't super easy to do in the United States. So when I saw that there was only one in green, I said, okay, well, let's go look at Illinois and see what's there. And there's a really cool project that's just founded 2021 called the Green Energy Justice Cooperative. So this was kind of thought of and formed by 3 different groups. So the first one's called Blacks in Green. So it's a national network of environmental justice organizations, but it's based in Illinois. And then part of it is also the Accelerate Climate Solutions, which is a nonprofit based in Illinois. And then one of their partners is a Minnesota cooperative. So that cooperative themselves has developed 8 solar garden projects. They've raised $18 million, but they're part of this Chicago, Illinois cooperative as well. So they are going to do 3 programs. So the first is a rooftop solar program. The second is a community garden program. But then they're also going to be a community choice aggregator. So they're going to be the retail electricity provider to people who sign up for it. So again, like not looking at just one model, they're trying to use like several to kind of make the numbers pencil out. Even though they're brand new, only founded in 2011 or 2021, sorry, they have the largest non-utility owned solar project in the United States. So it's a 9 megawatt project. That was supported in part by, obviously didn't pay for the whole thing, but $2.9 million from the Illinois Green Bank. So I think there's 20 states in the US that have green banks. And then just for their membership options, for the co-op, they have a low income, just $5 a membership. They have a standard membership, and then other organizations can also pay to be members. And then the other piece is this public power piece in the United States. And so there's 2003, this map is from 2023 data, but there's also 2003 municipal utilities throughout the United States. And so these are of various different sizes, but instead of buying your electricity from, like the large investor-owned utility, you're buying it essentially from the municipality. Some municipalities or some states which have large numbers of municipalities have formed co-ops or nonprofits of municipal utilities. So Massachusetts is one example of that. So they have one co-op and one nonprofit that basically cover all of the munis. And they're the wholesale electricity provider for those municipal utilities, but then they also provide services as well. So Energy New England, for instance, they do home energy assessments, EV charging, and they have rebate programs as well. And so Energy New England is actually part of some of our work at Concordia. And with me wearing a different hat, they're doing an energy storage, thermal energy storage project with a company called Stash Energy. So that's a Canadian thermal energy storage startup where they've taken a traditional mini split heat pump and paired it with thermal storage. And so what that allows them to do is, again, if you have a time of use rate where electricity is more expensive first thing in the morning, and then again, when everyone comes home from work, what thermal storage allows you to do is to store up overnight. And then when everyone wakes up, you can turn the heat pump off, but because you have the thermal storage, you can then continue to heat that space. Then you can charge up again in the middle of the day with, say, rooftop solar, and then discharge that electricity when everyone comes home again. So this project here, there's several partners. So Energy New England is one. There's funding from the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. Concordia is going to be doing the measurement and verification. And then we're also going to be building a digital twin of the two properties that the units are going into. So it's two low-rise, low-income seniors apartment buildings. But Taunton Housing Authority, who owns the buildings, they have 500 apartments within the municipality. And then there's 20 municipal members of Energy New England. So what Energy New England wants to do is they want this project to be a success. They want storage to go into all of the Taunton Housing Authority buildings, and then they can show those results to all of their other member companies. And so then they're left with a massive thermal battery, essentially. So then they can provide grid services and then generate more income for all their member utilities. I could chat about this forever, but I won't. Yes. And so just learnings, and again, it's very similar to the UK because there is no kind of national feed-in tariff or anything like that. So it's very local. So state-specific policies are super, super important. Like how Massachusetts implements things is not the same way that New York does, not the same way that California does. So, when elections change, things can change. Cross-sector partnerships are super important. So you're going to have nonprofits, you're going to have co-ops, you're going to have utilities, startups, consulting companies, sort of all working together to make these projects happen. And I got duplicated somehow. So
It's double.
It's doubly important. I would say it is. Maybe I did it on purpose. So yeah. And so that's it.
Great. Okay.
Thanks, guys.
So yeah, death by PowerPoint, but we'll live. Okay, so questions for Dan about that project. We could just turn that mic on as well. And yeah, that project or the US or same thing again, right? So what's resonating with you guys? What do you want to know more about? We can take notes and start sticking this into the report.
Yeah, I had a question for Dan. Over here, sorry. I don't think I'm on the camera for our online folks, but so Chicago and that region is a region of the US I'm really familiar with. And one of the things that kind of stuck out to me was they really branded themselves as a justice organization. And then I looked at the cities that they were in. And for those of you that don't know, Chicago is one of the most segregated cities in the US, with the north side being predominantly white, predominantly upper middle class, and the south side being predominantly black and predominantly low income. And I noticed both of the locations that they chose were upper middle class, predominantly white communities. And so I think it's a question of, I think it was Julie and Durya, both of whom are in this room, who've spoken about how sometimes co-ops are striving to be those things, but they're really just catering to privileged. I mean, these are not the wealthiest communities of Chicago, but they are solidly upper middle class, college educated communities. And so I didn't know if that came about in sort of learning about it, why they chose those spots, if that was a consideration.
Well, it's a good question. It's on. Or not.
It is now.
Okay, cool. So again, it's a really large solar array, right? 9 megawatts. So you need space to be able to do that. And so putting it in like downtown in Chicago, it's not really feasible. So they kind of put the projects where there was space and where there was community buy-in to actually put the projects in. But that doesn't limit who can join the co-op.
Okay.
Right? Like there's a co-op from Minnesota who's a member of the co-op. So they've kept it like really open. Like they describe themselves as like a multiracial cooperative. So it's kind of anyone can join. But sort of like the founding organizations are like Blacks and Green is a Black-led organization. And so from like the governance standpoint, that's who kind of has like all the like the impetus for forming it. Like so that's kind of ingrained in the cooperative. But yeah, anyone can kind of join it. And so that's gonna, impact how things go.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Dan around the cases? Dennis.
Just standing.
So the example of where you have the public utility sort of promoting battery storage is really interesting. And I'm thinking also, I think in Vermont, I don't know if you know of that example, where the utility actually, I think, subsidized homeowners to get batteries. Mm-hmm. And these examples are of local utilities going out and supporting and encouraging independence, I guess, of power service to individuals, households. And this is like we're having so much trouble getting local distribution or utility companies to support distributed energy. In Ottawa, the Ottawa Hydro has been singularly, I don't know, not just uncooperative. So how is this, why does this happen? Why are these public utilities so gung-ho and supportive? And why are we having so much trouble doing it here?
I'll just come show. So the Vermont, oh no. There we go. So the Vermont case is really interesting. Actually, I want to go back to here. So Vermont, they were the first one. It's called the Bring Your Own Device program that they rolled out. So you go buy a battery, you bring it to Green Mountain Power, who's the utility, and they'll pay you, I don't remember how many hundreds of dollars it is per kilowatt hour that you provide, but it's like really substantial. So the payback period on your residential Tesla or whatever the battery is, there's only certain batteries that fit into the program, but yeah, it's there. And so they were ahead of the game in Vermont. I think because it's Vermont, that's where Bernie Sanders is from. It's just part of the culture there. So they've been like pro local ownership of distributed energy resources. What FERC Order 2222 does is it mandates basically that homeowners can participate through demand response with batteries. So now all the other states that are governed by FERC, they need to start rolling these things out. So National Grid, who is one of the UK utilities, they own 2 utilities in the United States, one in Vermont or one in Massachusetts. It's still called National Grid, and then one in New York. And their program is called Connected Solutions. And so like they're rolling the same ones out. They're both investor-owned utilities. Green Mountain Power is a Canadian company. When you kind of go up the corporate ladder, it's ultimately a Canadian company that does it. But frankly, I think it all comes down to like it's locally driven. Like people wanted those, right? Like Massachusetts, Vermont, very not Republican states, right? And so like they're the first ones that have done heat pumps in a big way. And so really like that was bottom up, you know, working with the utilities. But then also you have to think that the people that work at those utilities are part of those communities. And so it's not, it's very much a less us versus them type of scenario in those jurisdictions. The same company that runs the Green Mountain Power Bring Your Own Device program, they run the same program in Nova Scotia now. It just came out last year. It's called EcoShift. The company's called Virtual Peaker. And so it's a copy and paste program basically. So it's the Bring Your Own Device program. And so they do it in Nova Scotia now. So, and it's funny, I've done a little bit of work with Hydro Ottawa and they're open to some things, but they want to lead it, is my experience with them, is they don't want other people to do it. So I don't have an answer, but yeah, there's, at least in those 2 places, it's been bottom up that has really driven that.
It's a great research question, right? Like what makes those ones do what they do?
I'll stand up to move. I have one general like question or remark on your study, because I love the examples. They're all like different in their own way and inspiring. What I would kind of really like to see is a little bit how did they pave the road for these kind of projects going ahead without 50% or more public funding coming from somewhere? Because that's a little bit of a thing that like all these cooperative efforts, they usually fly if there's a lot of public money going into them, but then it's kind of almost like a public project with sort of supposedly local ownership. What we are here trying to achieve mostly is we don't have any public entity wanting to fund us. So in that regard, like for learning, it would be really valuable to see how that has paved the road in the last 20 years for something similar in those countries that doesn't rely on that much funding. So if that would be something that came out of your guys' research, that would be really nice to emphasize. Yeah. And the other question that I have, and it's kind of touched on this here and there, is, so in my experience with the co-op world, there's often a lot of discussions about the social justice aspect of things and the shared local ownership and how are we going to combine community benefits into this, and how are we going to serve underserved communities. And then the reality, it often looks like the cooperative model basically works if there's governmental funding and rich people doing it. So how exactly does that intent of what we all feel we're doing, which is something great socially, and what we're actually doing, which is spending government money, match? It's an open question, really, because it puzzles me a little bit, and I keep running into discussions about our social purpose, and I'm like, well, the social purpose doesn't pay anyone, unfortunately, and also doesn't realize projects, because it's just not. Does anyone have an answer, or did you come across something in your research that's following up on that?
I have a little comment on the first piece. So like I know that co-ops aren't eligible for things like funding from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. But if a co-op were to say partner with a municipality of some sort, then that can unlock other kinds of funds, right? And so is there a partnership on a solar farm, right, between a co-op and a municipality that is eligible for that type of funding? And so it may not be a 100% cooperative owned project, but there are potentially other avenues that you can do that. NRCan money can be played around like that as well.
This is, I'll jump in on this one. This is like issue in the co-op sector, back to the beginning of the co-op sector, right? What's the relationship with the state and what's the appropriate relationship with the state? And yeah, there are projects, but they usually happened, as you say, before like all these policies rolled out with huge government support. And then the projects become self-sustaining, especially when we're trying to do innovation, tech innovation, right? There was a question earlier around where does the seed funding for the innovation come from? It comes from the public sector. So I think we might be asking too much to say, okay, how do we innovate and tick the social boxes and do it somehow with no government funding, but we also don't want too much private funding so that we cede control of the project, right? So I think there are trade-offs to all of these things. And so, yeah, there are amazing social purpose co-op energy projects, but they come with huge grant funding. But in my view, and I might be in a minority here, I think the state should be funding that. Right? So if they're not directly delivering it, they should be funding it in other places. So I don't see the public funding as a major thing, but of course, from an organizational perspective, if you're dependent on that, and then the funding changes, you know, you have to have strategies for self-sufficiency. So I think it's about like the timeline of the project and where the policy setting is, and it's going to look so different in each place. But what we were trying to do with this project, and I've taken a note of that mentally, because I think it's really important to set this out as like a series of trade-offs for people in projects. So we do have like a summary slide here. And essentially, we wanted to highlight, like I said, that co-ops internationally are leading large, sometimes innovative, but mostly multi-actor partnerships. And as you guys, a lot of you have identified, with significant grant and public funding. The ones that seem to tick the most social purpose boxes and tech innovation boxes are those that come with a ton of extra support. Right? Especially when you're looking for, as we did, the marginalized, or not always in the German and Danish cases, but not your typical communities being the leader of it. It needs a ton of support. It can't come and won't come from that community. But what we were really interested in seeing is how the policies facilitating the projects really vary. And I think the learnings potentially for Canada are because we all know in our northern and remote diesel-dependent communities, in our underserved communities, in our urban communities, in various different provincial regimes, the story's so different. So I think that's one of the benefits of looking internationally, is to say, yeah, that I don't think we could do that there, but also I think it's useful to say, yeah, but you know what, we might not be able to do that in my province, but that might fly in PEI, for example, or BC, or not, right? But every one of our provinces seems like one of the countries, essentially, right? Or one of the states in Australia or whatnot. And that makes this kind of organizing so difficult, but it also means we have a lot of different lessons to learn. So that's what we're going to try to do in the draft report, and then we'll send it out for comment to you folks. But like, here's a range of potential lessons given different contexts, right? Here's a range of different policy strategies. Some of them define community really broadly, and some of them define it really narrowly. And there are benefits and drawbacks to both of those kinds of definitions, right? So I'm going to stop there. We've taken you right to 3 o'clock. Please come and talk to us. These guys have worked their butts off, and they have so much more than what they presented today. But we'd really love your feedback and your criticisms, and also the kinds of things that we got around, okay, what to push on a little bit more. What kind of extra detail do we need? And then, yeah, as I said, it's going to filter into the rest of the project. So thanks for your attention. And the next panel is going to be totally different. It's going to be Garrett and Leighton having a conversation and asking questions with no PowerPoint. So I'm sure everyone will be so excited about that.